Hello and welcome to Sprouted Dreams. I hope that you are watching this on video, but I will try to explain things clearly. So if you're just listening to the podcast, you can see what I'm doing in your mind, as well as people on video who are watching. So I wanted to go over a few more color techniques before we started doing the embossing. Now, before I started using the embossing powders, I used metallic paint, which is acrylic paint in these small containers. However, because the metallics do not show as clearly as with embossing powder, you have to be a little bit cautious when applying these, especially to wood. That is why I have pieces like this door, which is going to be my golden door. I paint them so they start out like this, and then I will give them an undercoating of a darker color. It doesn't really matter. I've used kind of a brick red, and this is a very warm brown. But as long as you give it a darker undertone and then put the gold over it, you're going to get a far better effect, because you're going to sand this a little bit and then varnish it. And the varnishing will also darken the gold. So, pardon my fingers here, but you can see how this dark brown helps the gold to sort of pop out from the background. Whereas if you would do that straight on the light colored wood, it does not work the same. So keep that in mind. If you are only using metallic paints, you want to give it a dark color underneath. And this works in a similar way with the embossing powder. Although the embossing powder can give you a more vibrant metallic, the idea remains that if you put a light color next to a dark, it's just going to pop more. Whereas if you put a metallic, whether that be gold or bronze or even silver, especially silver, if you put silver against a light color, it's almost not going to show, which is why many people use blues or purple with the silver, because it gives that dark base. So you can see now how that other brown kind of comes through a little bit and gives the gold something to stand against. I hope that makes sense. And I will finish this one up in just a minute. And yes, I use my finger a lot, especially with acrylics, because you can just clean that up and you don't have to worry about cleaning a brush off, because this is wood. This is not like a painting or something. And I'm not doing fine furniture here. I will go over the sandpapers I use next, because when you're doing miniatures, you don't have to worry as much. See, like this edge here is not perfectly sanded down to a fine furniture detail. You just don't have to do that so much, especially if you use a heavy varnish, which you really need in order to put these pieces outside. I'm going to go ahead and let that dry and rub this extra onto this one. I will finish up this outside piece in just a minute. So next, after I wash my finger off, I'm going to show you some of the sandpapers. Okay, when you are doing sanding for your miniatures, depending on the type of wood you are using, some woods are going to be very hard and require a bit more grit to them. Some of them, if you're trying to level pieces and make things very, very even, you're going to use an even firmer sandpaper. I go with this one. I believe this is 70 grit. It's very much like sand, literal sand glued to paper and then sealed. It's very, very coarse. And I use this particularly for benches when I'm trying to get pieces flat. So this bench, I have already fitted this round piece to this other round piece, and I've drilled out the holes for the seat, or for the legs, and I'm going to show you how I apply those. So the legs, I simply cut twigs and drill holes to where I feel it's very, very close. Like I can tell that this piece is going to fit here, but not quite. So then I will choose the leg I want into which hole, because I want this little wider base for the foot. And so what I'm going to do is choose the length that I want first, and then sand that down with that super grit sandpaper, and then glue this in. So that might be a little tall, but I can always take it down because this sandpaper is so coarse. And I can also narrow the leg a little bit so that it fits perfectly into that hole. And I always use the Tight Bond glue because this has been the stuff that absolutely holds the best. Tight Bond 3 Ultimate Wood Glue. It's waterproof, it goes interior, exterior, and it just holds beautifully. Okay, now I can see that this is going to fit very nicely into there. I want to make sure that that's the length I want, and then I'm going to match the other pieces to this leg, and I'm going to make sure that this leg is also going to be flat so that it doesn't wobble. So we have to make sure, and again, this very, very coarse sandpaper is perfect for that. So I can make sure that this leg is straight and then apply the bench to it. Hope that makes sense, so that you don't actually have to worry about wobbliness. Now, that looks really nice, and it's the right length, but you can see that this is not perfectly even. So I will make sure once I get all the pieces in that the bench sits perfectly flat and is ready for gluing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you the bench once it's ready to be glued. Okay, here I have all the legs fitted into the holes, but the bench does not sit level. So, and this one is a little bit loose. So what I have to do is make sure that I have the angle correct on all of these while it's being set flat. I'm going to try to show you this way. See how the pieces are uneven? This leg especially sticks out, and this one especially is long. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this one down just a bit, again with that super heavy sandpaper, because you don't want to take off too much. You can always take off more, but you can't put it back. So go ahead and shorten your long pieces first, and then if anything seems too loose, you may have to, see that's way too loose and way too short. So I'm actually going to have to cut another piece and make sure that I choose another stick that is a little bit thicker and a little bit longer. So that is what we're going to do here. This looks extremely long to me, but what do I know? I'm not the bench. The bench tells you what to do, not your eyeball. Because your eyes will definitely fool you. See, look how long that was. And it's almost the right length. So sand it down just a bit. Because, look at that. All right, now we have the bench sitting but it's tilted too far. See? So I'm trying to show you with the angles, but it actually sits down a little bit. So we want to kind of bring these pieces down, but we can do that after it's glued. So what we're going to do is go ahead and glue these pieces in, and then when the glue is completely dry, you can put this on a belt sander and lightly tap it down so that it's all the right angle, so that the bench doesn't sit tilted too far forward or too far back. Hope that makes sense, and I hope it helps you to glue the proper pieces you want. I really wanted this one to have this foot here. So that's going to be kind of my main height for this bench. These are going to be a little bit long, but they're still going to show these little nubs on the pieces that I really wanted to show. And this one is just my back stability piece. And that's going to have a nice angle out this way so that the bench is stable. All right. We're going to move on now to another bench. Okay, I thought that this piece of wood was so pretty because it has this really unique pattern in the wood here. And it looks like whenever this piece was cut, it was probably firewood, but I picked it up out of our wood pile, and this looks really nice. Now, this rough sandpaper is far too much for that, so we're going to go the next one down. Generally, I use this heavy sandpaper for brutish sort of sanding, and then I go to 120 grit. And then when I finish after any belt sanding I need to do, I go to a 400. I don't go any less than 400, and I'm not like polishing to make it perfect. I just want that when I put the varnish on top, that it looks nice and shiny and gives a reflection of the light on the piece. And also, if you have it nice and flat and varnished, it's going to stay protected outside of the elements, as long as you follow the care instructions of reapplying the varnish and a light sanding once a year. I find that wood pieces do okay outside, even in harsh weather, unless it's like super harsh with hurricane winds or extreme freezing and heaving. You can usually get by with a light sanding and a reapplication of Varathane spar urethane oil-based once a year. And as long as you do that, you should be okay. You can see have just a little bit of the 120 grit and then the 400. It smoothed this down considerably. Now, this has a bit of bark still on the outside, which I will chip off with a chisel. I never leave the bark on because bark will, no matter what you do, absolutely degrade and decay. So I think this is going to look really nice, but I want to have kind of a backrest for this bench. And I thought that this piece of wood really looked nice like this. So perhaps that might be a nice, well, maybe like that. Aha, that was it. Might give a nice bench back to that. But you can go larger too. You have to kind of play with your pieces and see what looks best, especially with this twisty type of wood. Now that would look really nice as well for a bench. It has this kind of end piece here. You could kind of fit that, sand that down a bit, and then fit that piece in there. That would give a nice big bench and then some chubby legs on the bottom, perhaps. Or maybe you want to go more delicate and put I'm kind of staying with the same theme here. You could have a flatter bench with just sort of a little hand rest here. So it depends on the look that you're going for. These are kind of moderate pieces. This one's very big and heavy. Ooh, maybe that one. Oh, look at that. See, now that's going to give you a really nice bench shape. And then with some chubby legs, I think this is our winner. Isn't that funny? The last one. It's always the last one. And look at how nice that blends into the back. Yes. So this piece will be cut here. I'm going to mark it. And I'm going to kind of bend that around. And that is going to be yet another bench. I will be sure to show that one to you next week. So I just, again, want to reiterate how much the sandpaper is important in fitting pieces together easily so that you're able to take curved pieces like this and bendy pieces, and you can always add them to a door or a door frame and come up with your own unique creations. You just have to play with the pieces in order to make them work. That would look really great on that door. Or you could go with something smaller. Let's see, over here. This is actually one of my fairy doors. It has a little fairy that is applied to the door, but if you wanted to use this in a different way, you definitely could take one of these pieces and follow the sort of frame of the door in order to get something completely else done, or completely cover it like this. You could come up with a completely different look for a door by adding exterior pieces like this. I hope that gets you started. And like I said, we will be going over embossing powders next week on some of these pieces, so you can watch me emboss and add that pop of metallics to your wood pieces. So until next week, happy fairy gardening.